Welcome back, everyone. I'm so excited. Today, we've got Dr. Zach Groshell here with us, and we're going to talk all about explicit instruction, one of my favorite topics near and dear to my heart. As a tutor and working with kids one-on-one, that was the number one complaint I heard from kids. Were like, why can't my teacher just tell me? Tell me what to do. And they get really annoyed. And so that's why they like to come, because I would tell them explicitly what they needed to do step by step. So I love that you're talking about this topic, but let's tell a little bit about your background. You obviously have a PhD and you've done a lot of coaching and educational consultant, but now we can add to your bio, you're an author of a new book. Do you want to tell us quickly about that book?
Sure. The book is called Just Tell Them: The Power of Explanations and Explicit Teaching. You're right. It was just published and actually it sold out everywhere. It's sold out, but you can get your copy in just a couple weeks with the new wave of shipping, and it's also available on Kindle. It is really hard, Adrian, to write a book. It is hard, but it's even harder to write a book after you just finished your PhD and you are sick of writing things, and you have two kids who are hanging on the rafters and crawling under your legs while you're trying to write in a very small house. But I managed,
Yes.
I managed to do it.
Well done. Well done. Well, we're so excited to have you. And I think it's such an important topic to talk about, which is why it sold out, because this is a huge debate. And I think it's important for us to talk about explicit instruction. So, for those that are listening that have maybe never heard of this phrase before, tell them what it is.
Right. Well, explicit instruction is another name for the most effective, powerful tool that we have in our toolkit, which is just unambiguous and well scaffolded, well calibrated instruction. Explicit instruction used to be called direct instruction, was the more common word, and it
Mhm.
started way back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s as investigators were trying to figure out what is the most efficient and effective method for conveying information, for getting students to retain and transfer knowledge. And through the work of people like Barak Rosenshine and Siegfried Engelmann, folks who were at the forefront of trying to figure out which methods are more effective than others, they came up with sort of a teacher effects pattern, an effectiveness pattern that involves modeling and practice and feedback in a very scaffolded way, where the source of the information starts with the teacher, but gradually over time, either the challenge is incrementally increased or the teacher removes supports and gets the student to take more control and ownership over their learning so that finally they can do it by themselves. And it's just, you can use other things other than cognitive learning to explain it almost easier. Like imagine you're going to a technical college. I just was talking to a group of teachers at a technical college for adults, and one of the teachers was charged with showing their students how to lift an elderly person from the bed with a two-armed assist. And so what they will do is they will show the students how to do that with a participating elderly person, and then they will gradually pass that responsibility over so they can keep everybody safe and they can make sure that everybody does it in the correct way with the right form and the right procedure. And finally, the assessment is that they can do it by themselves so they can get their certificate. That pretty much applies to math and to reading and to everything else. We've got to show them how to do it and get them to practice it.
Right. Okay, but the stakes are higher in that situation, right? A person could get hurt. And I think the argument might be like, I'm not hurting anyone by letting them explore a little in mathematics. So we know that the debate is about exploration, inquiry-based learning. So can you contrast those two ideas for us so that people understand? Because a lot of people listening might not have as much background knowledge as you and I do, Zach. So I'd love if we could talk about that, what they look like and how they're different.
Love, yeah, and I will. let's talk about the stakes here, right? Of course, like I could have given another example, which is I'm crossing the road with my daughter. Do I let her figure out whether or not she's supposed to look both ways, right? That would be insane, right? Safety is the critical piece. We all understand that. But let me tell you the stakes when it comes to math. Students in the early grades, given a lot of exploratory time, right? Because play is very important for young learners. I'm not against play, right? But imagine you have a teacher who puts out a lot of tubs and things of games and such, and that is the math block. And the rest of the time is spent doing other things, maybe valuable things, but math is minimized. And the only time you really get math is through discovery, play, learning with tubs of
Yeah.
games, right? Well, the first grade teacher has to pick up your mess the next year, and they have to teach everything that you were supposed to teach. And because math is hierarchical, they have to double teach. They have to teach twice as much, right? Well, they can't, so they don't, and perhaps it's a new teacher, so they only teach really 80% of what they should have taught, and so on and so forth, where there's an accumulation of of skill deficits across all of the foundational skills, so that by the time they get to middle school, that is expressed in the form of I hate math. I'm not a math person. Math isn't for me. And slowly, students start to really internalize that blame and start to feel, well, you know what? I'm just stupid. I'm not as smart as the people around me. And when they get to high school, that automatically cuts off an entire world for them of choices where they could choose to pursue fields that are high paying, that are highly fulfilling, that they can make their difference in the world. But instead, they are limited to a smaller subset of subjects and maybe not even allowed or permitted to go into college. So the stakes may not be immediate, but they are real, right? It's real that we have to teach this in a way that is engaging, exciting, and satisfying, but also effective. Um,
Absolutely. I agree. And I was thinking about, when I'm reading the opening parts of your book, I'm thinking about my own experience. So in middle school, it was early 90s. I'm in a classroom, inquiry based is introduced in my classroom. We're sitting in groups, and I'm chuckling because I'm thinking about your book. Sitting in groups, and we're doing all these group projects, and somehow I'm earning A's. And I remember thinking, how is this possible? I know I'm not learning anything. Like I knew I wasn't grasping it. And that teacher went on maternity leave, and a new guy comes in and he turns it to Rose. The classroom got really bland, and he just did direct instruction. And I learned so much from him. Such a huge contrast. And so I think your book is really helpful in showing, like, this is one way you have been seeing it. Here's this other way that's really important. So a lot of people claim that this explicit instruction is hurting students. What do you think? Can you defend that? What does good explicit instruction look like?
Yeah, well, it's not it's not hurting anybody, first of all, right? If we had any evidence that it was hurting students, I would be very concerned, and I would want to explore what were the conditions behind that? Why would that occur, right? I do know there is a type of teaching that perhaps it's not harmful, but it's very ineffective, and that's lecturing, right? And explicit instruction is not a monologue of sort of a long-winded kind of teacher stands at the front and talks, and it's very verbose, and it's long-winded, it's boring. That you find that usually in universities more than schools, to be frank, people that were never trained to be teachers. But teachers that lean on that method, they come in with an unprepared kind of 40-minute lecture, and the last 20 minutes are meant to be assignments. That is not explicit instruction. Explicit instruction is highly, highly interactive. It's back and forth between the teacher and the student in what sometimes amounts to only 2 minutes of teacher talk or 1 minute of teacher talk, a minimal statement that says, this is what this is. And then we signal to the math and we get students to work problems. And whether that's on a mini whiteboard or in their notebook or on a worksheet, students are meant to constantly be responding. And so the largest chapter of the book is really around so-called engagement or participation strategies, which is just that more important even than the model that the teacher gives is the fact that the content of that explanation is clear and concise is important. It's that it is just feeding and funneling just a little bit of information into working memory at a time before the teacher elicits a response and gets everyone to pay attention, to initiate their own response, and they can use that, the teacher, as formative assessment to check, can I move on? Do they get it? Do I need to explain it again? So when you go to an explicit instruction classroom, you may feel this rhythm, this kind of buzz of the teacher is active and up there and choral responding and getting kids to do 3, 2, 1, show me your many whiteboards. And you'd be fascinated because it doesn't look like the lecturing that we're so used to. And it also doesn't look like a student activating type of method, a sort of minimally guided method where I give you something, you go out with your friends and figure it out together. It's teacher orchestrated, but the students are engaged and required to constantly be paying attention and responding at high rates.
I love that. I think that's really important. In your book, you have some really fantastic diagrams of what you just mentioned about that working memory, and you referenced the bottleneck. Can you explain a little more about that concept about overwhelming that working memory?
Love it. So, working memory is the central structure that teachers need to understand when it comes to the mind. Uh, we don't really need to memorize lots of different brain parts, or understand that whole chapter in the neuroscience part of the Psychology 101 textbook. It's a lot to remember, right? The really teachers need to attend to the central mechanism for learning, which is working memory. And working memory is where thinking happens. Right now, you are working with the words that I am saying in your working memory. And anything that's outside the learner, the worksheet in front of them, the project in front of them, the explanation that goes into their ears, this is all information that must be processed in working memory. The more they process it and the deeper they process it, the more likely it is that information is going to be transferred into long-term memory. The problem with both lecturing and discovery learning is actually very similar. And that's that they they are not designed with working memory limitations in mind. And they're not considering that working memory is this fragile, limited beast that can only handle 3 to 4 items at a time for only about 20 seconds before it gets overloaded or before the information just kind of slips out. So with lecturing, I'm giving you like 30, 40 elements of information at a time. If you don't have any prior knowledge to connect to, it just goes in one ear and out the other. And with discovery learning, we're giving you the fact that there is this busy, noisy environment with lots of objects around and information that you don't have the prior knowledge to understand. And so you're meant to sort of construct or generate your own answer through guessing. And what happens through that is you end up having a very similar thing happen in working memory. It gets overloaded, nothing gets retained, you don't learn the information.
Absolutely. And I think such a great example that other adults can relate to is their cell phone distracting them, right? I'm interviewing you and my phone keeps buzzing because I forgot to put it on airplane mode and my heater's going, it's making noise, and now I'm paying attention to that stimuli and what Zach is saying, right? That's three things. So now my brain's overwhelmed. And so in the book, you talk about tell the kids to put the phone away and never look back, be a phone free zone. I think that's brilliant. And it should be set. My kids' schools are phone free now. And so, I've adjusted. It's not a big deal. I can talk to my kid in between classes. It's not a problem, right? So I love that you point those things out. That working memory is so fragile. And in an exploration type environment, if you've got lots of noise going on, there is a really good chance they're half listening to a conversation, over here and maybe reading what's on their paper. It's really just a delicate situation. So another point that I liked in your book was you talk about how important the words you say are. What's being said matters, that clarity. Can you discuss more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we all can acknowledge like being clearer is very, very important when you're speaking, right? The so I wanted to really operationalize clarity in the book from a scientific perspective, looking at teacher clarity research and just general kind of presentation guidelines around how to present. But the main thing, sort of, if you divide it into a few different categories, one is that you really only want to say the words that need to be said when you're talking. You want to cut out extraneous information, a lot of sort of tangents, sort of side stories. Maybe they're jokes that are mainly meant for the teacher, and they're not really furthering the student's understanding of math, right? You want to cut those things out. And in their place, you really want to be sure that you are filling working memory with just the essential information. And that is very hard to do. We
So
are
hard.
naturally inclined to say and ah and to have false starts and hesitations. If we're not confident with our subject, we haven't taught this before. It's doing two things at once. It's monitoring the classroom environment and thinking about what we're going to say and how we're going to
Mhm.
say it. So I mean, I have recommendations in there, right, for teachers who are sort of in the mode of self-coaching, which is film yourself, watch your speech, right? Try to be extremely precise and to even write out or script out what you're going to say in sort of an outline and stick to your script to be willing to confront that a lot of the tangential things in your lessons are not necessarily as exciting or as you thought they were, sort of to stick to the point. And a lot of this kind of goes back to understanding of learning objectives and assessments, right? If you have a clear path from the end of your lesson to the beginning that you're working towards, you've got to be efficient. You've got to use that time correctly. So all of that extra teacher talk really can be minimized, and it can really just say the things, the essential information, with loads of opportunities for the kids to respond and give you feedback on your teaching.
Absolutely. So when you've observed teachers, besides the and the ands, what other kinds of phrases are you seeing are pretty common for teachers to throw out as they're like speaking and lecturing?
Yeah, well, one of the things that often happens is what's called in the research discontinuity, where basically the teacher is talking about something and then they interject in the middle to say, but yeah, there's also this other thing, right? And then they go back to what they were saying, basically breaking the chain of thought between the two things. Usually
Mhm.
when you're learning math, you need to maintain a coherent thread between each of the steps or parts of the procedure. But when you let your presentations be discontinuous, where you constantly go, yeah, well, we're also going to learn that tomorrow, and don't forget about this, and that kind of information can be very hard to keep hold of in working memory. I love the example, like if you don't believe me about that, thinking about when you're teaching and then the PA system, the announcements go on right in the middle of when you were talking, and then you go, okay, so rewind back to where I started, and you have to sort of start all over again because there was space between the first thing you were saying and the next thing you were saying.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good point. I really, really appreciate that. Okay, so then also in your book, you're talking about inputs and outputs. Love this idea. Explain what those are.
Right. I mean, if you divide up teaching in a very simplified way into two different types of interactions, you're going to get things the teacher does to get you to think about stuff, right? We're talking about inputs, things that you funnel into working memory. And then outputs are things that you're getting them to retrieve or draw upon prior knowledge or what you just said, right? And so if you think of all instruction is involving worked examples or right explanations, demonstrations, things that the teacher does, and then also we need to see that the students are getting it, processing it, they are understanding it. we're going to have to recruit them quite often to express those ideas, to say the things back. And so it's teaching is very much, when I say interactive, I mean alternation. An
Mhm.
alternation between the teacher shows just a little bit of information and then asks a question that pulls out that information. That back and forth movement is what gets kids to keep thinking about the material, right? Because you are engaging them at every interval with another question and then another input and then another question.
Yes, I love that. So with the questions that people are developing, if they're writing out their script, do you think it's helpful for them to develop those questions ahead of time when they're planning and preparing?
Those questions can be really the clothes hangers for the rest of the script, because at each of these points it's sort of like a hinge point or a checkpoint. If I ask that question, what is the suitable response for that question? Okay, this is what they should say. Great. What if they don't answer it correctly? Well, if it's 80% proficient, maybe I'll just ask it again. But if it's, or maybe I'll just take the two kids that seem to not get it, I'll put them in the back in a small group and we'll work together while everyone's doing independent work. But if they're all getting a low success rate, 40, 50% on the questions, this is an opportunity for me to rewind, think this was a problem with the presentation, the communication wasn't seamless and faultless. Let me just try this again. Let me use my backup explanation that maybe this one will land. So that's the important part, I think, of any of these interactions is the teacher has to hold all this in mind. This is where scripting is so important, because I'm not talking about an actor's script. I'm talking
Right.
about a general outline. When you do this, you are setting yourself up to be able to see the kids in your classroom and not have to think so much about what you're saying and what you're asking. It's already been planned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're proposing here is you're basically encouraging the teacher to support their own working memory, right? Like they're
Right.
overwhelmed with stimuli too. And you might have some crazy answer come out of a kid and you might be so taken back. It's like, where was I? Oh yeah, I have it written down in the script. So I really appreciate that discussion. It's so helpful. So along with that, you talk about visuals and direct instruction. How do the visuals support the student when they're learning, and what should we be considering when we're planning our lessons?
Love it. Math teachers are probably ahead of the game when it comes to visuals, because is full of concrete representations, representational images, and also just the abstract symbols. Those are the things that we are showing on the board. Those are the things that we are working in front of students. Math teachers seem to usually get this, but it's not uncommon, especially in other subjects, for there not to be accompanying visuals that are paired and support and complement what the teacher is saying. The problem with visuals is that there are a lot of different nuances. If I
Mhm.
put unnecessary, silly visuals up, this is no different than the clarity of an explanation. It's just that the coherence of the presentation is out of whack. The student is thinking about what's on the board and they're looking past the teacher, and that thing is fun and interesting, a dancing dog or something, and it doesn't illustrate what the teacher is saying. So you have to
Mhm.
select visuals that pair with what you're saying. You also have to make sure with visuals that you are, and it sounds so common sense, but it's legit. You need to signal with your hand or with a PowerPoint laser or whatever else. You need to signal to the parts of the visual so the students know what part you're talking about. This is especially true with like diagrams. Like you have the water cycle and you want them to march through the water cycle with you. I either need to populate the screen with one element at a time through animations, or I need to point to those parts with my finger, or I simply need to draw each element one at a time. This is all, again, going back to working memory. Oh, a big old complex diagram is nicer than having nothing, but it can also
Mhm.
be a source of cognitive load that may be too heavy if we're not careful about funneling their attention just towards the parts of the image they need to be thinking about.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Could you talk to every presenter that ever existed at a conference? They're
I know.
infamous for this, right? Like just show a little bit at a time. Get your laser pointer out. That would be great. I think it's humorous that people often want to think adults can handle it. They're older. No, we're all vulnerable to the same things.
And it's easier to just kind of make a PowerPoint into a script, essentially, like that
Mhm.
you as the presenter use to remind yourself what you're supposed to be presenting about. But that's not how it should be. You should actually have your presentation more or less memorized, and the
Mhm.
images are simply driving home your point. They're giving a concrete reference point for the audience to, oh, that's what he's talking about. I don't need to construct that image in my mind. I can see it. You're showing them what you're talking about. And that usually just means a very simple image with maybe a small caption on each PowerPoint slide. And if you want them to read a load of text, you've got to pause and say, I'm going to have you read this now, or you need to give it to them in a handout and say, I'm going to have you read it. But you can't do both at the same time. A huge long, a bunch of text that you're duplicating while speaking, they're just going to either ignore one source of information or they're going to ignore you talking.
Yes. So the other thing I'm curious about with these visual distractions, what about on a worksheet or a do it now kind of page? Have you seen any issues with cluttered pages?
Oh, yeah, the principles all apply, right? And a lot of times when we talk about cognitive load and working memory, some of this research is around the design of materials, right? So the same thing applies, right? Do we have way too many words on the page that they don't need to read? Take them out. Are there images that don't support understanding? Take them out. Only include the essential information and make sure that the information is in space in the correct orientation, so the captions match the picture, and the place that you're going to write in is blank and large and clean, sort of a minimalist design. It's funny how you say that, like the way we design online courses, the way we design posters, the way we design an advertisement on TV, they all sort of fit into this realm of
They
clarity
do.
and sort of minimalist information, because our working memory can only handle so much. And so we've got to be very, very intentional about the choices we make when we present information.
Absolutely. My last question for you is this isn't specific to just a population with learning disabilities. This applies to any learner. I just want you to talk a little bit about that.
It does apply to any learner, and but there are some I maybe I'll give some extra interesting details here for people around this thought. Um, yeah, let's think about phonics for a moment, because most people can understand that there's been a movement lately to reinstate phonics in its proper place in education. That there were too many people that were in favor of sort of an unsystematic, implicit way of acquiring the squiggles on the page, which is by giving kids lots of books.
Mhm.
Um, the we know that that was not very good for almost anybody, but it especially disadvantaged kids who needed a lot more repetitions, a lot more explicit instruction, and a lot more support. That this is what is true, I think, about explicit instruction as a methodology, where it's harmful for nobody, right,
Mhm.
to be
Mhm.
explicitly instructed. And in fact, if I was going to design a gifted and talented program from the ground up where all the students are homogeneously grouped and they're high one percenters, I would use explicit instruction. It's just the pacing would be faster. I would give fewer examples. I would ask questions that immediately the challenge was graduated without that sort of slow scaffolded approach, right? But I would be using explicit instruction, just like a a supercharged version of it. But
Yeah.
but when I have a whole group of kids, 30 kids that are in a heterogeneous setting, it's not harmful for those kids to undergo really great explicit instruction that also involves an element of differentiation. And it is crucial. It is crucial for the kids, the so-called at-risk or low kids, the kids with disabilities, who what they need is a teacher who can break it down for them because their working memory, which cannot be altered, by the way. This working
Hmm.
memory limitation is essentially an inbuilt limitation that we can't magically expand.
Right.
They need a teacher that honors that working memory constraint by just making learning easier. And so
Hmm.
far in education, we have prioritized or we have encouraged the practice of making learning harder. And we call them by all these euphemisms. We call it productive struggle. We say that it's about building thinking and all this other stuff. But really what it does is it makes the kids who come in with more resources, more prior knowledge, higher working memory, it lets them skate by. But the kids who really need us and our support are withheld the supports that they need.
Yes. Yes. Well said. That's exactly what we needed to hear today. Oh, we could go on forever, Zach. It's so good. So, what I'm going to do instead is just tell people go get your second round of your sold out book. Just tell people where they can find it.
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon and in all the countries. And the publisher is John Catt. They'd love to hear from you if you want to get like a bulk order for your school. And I
Cool.
think that's probably what sold it out because people were taking pictures of like, look at our book club, and they bought 40 books, and it's like, okay, that's where they
Oh,
all went, right? So if you contact John Catt from Hotter Education, they can give you a discount on bulk orders. So.
absolutely. And also, I would love it for people to know about your podcast. I think your podcast is great. How can people get connected to that?
Yeah, it's called Progressively Incorrect. And it comes from this whole idea that so-called progressive education, which is just, that leans on discovery and kind of loose behavior and rules and things like that, that ultimately disadvantages the very kids that need structured
Yeah.
learning. So it's called Progressively Incorrect. You can check it out on all the different places.
It's so good. It's so good, you guys. Go check it out. It's excellent. You're going to learn a lot. And we'll make sure to link up to all of these things. And as you know, we like to end with a math joke or a pun or something. Zach, do you have one for us?
I tried giving it a stab. Let's see. Um, let's see if you like this one.
Okay, okay.
Teaching math through discovery is like telling your roommate to assemble the furniture you bought, but without the instructions. Sure, sure they'll be engaged, but what ultimately gets built is probably not going to look like the picture on the box.
Right? I love it. Thank you. That is the best analogy. It was so much fun today. Everyone, go give him a follow and get that book.
Thank you so much for having me.